So I'm going to tell a ghost story, and it's it's a little different than I think your normal ghost story for two reasons. First, it's true, which sounds kind of a weird thing to say, but before I became a Christian, I love to debunk things, palm reading and all that kind of stuff. I also like to debunk ghosts. I went on ghost hunts. My daughter and I went in with like the the ghost hunter guys from the Sci-Fi Channel, whatever that show was, and I mean it was a lot of fun. But I didn't believe a word of any of the ghost stories that were being told and things like that. I just thought it was all a bunch of bunk, and materialistically, it is a bunch of bunk. I think most people that claim to be palm readers and all that are just using tricks of the trade, whereas a very small number of them actually do have information that's given to them by demons, just the way that I was given information by God. When I think in the last video we recorded, I talked about finding something that was lost that I had no way of knowing where it was, but I prayed on it, boop, I knew where it was. That kind of thing happens, and it's real. Sometimes I think with people reading palms, things like that, the witchcraft stuff, most of it again is a bunch of bunk, and it's all just kids playing games. But there is a spirit world. There's a world behind the world, and we're not the only spirits that God created. And if you're playing around with supernatural, you need to stop, because again, 99% of the time, it probably won't do you any harm, but 1% of the time, it's going to do you great harm. So leave it alone. Anyway, it's a ghost story. So this ghost story is true. Second thing that sets it apart, I think, is this ghost story really is about the glory of God, because it's an example of God's great grace that he has for people who were at one time his enemies. I was an enemy of God, not in the sense of like the pseudo-atheists who hate God. Like I never hated God, but I would mock God. I would make fun of him. I didn't follow any of Christ's commands or anything like that, but I was God's enemy. But I was an honest one, and I opened my heart and I said, if you're real, show me. Not like in the sense of like a dare, but I want to know. And he showed me. This experience is an example of the types of things that he was showing me. He was making me deal with things that my materialistic point of view would not explain. So let's get to it. It started around 2 a.m. One night. I woke up, and I don't recall what woke me up, but I looked around the room, and I have enough light in my bedroom at night that I can see when my eyes are accustomed to it, but someone coming into the room wouldn't be able to see. It's definitely by design. But it is enough light that I can see pretty much what's going on. My wife, it's too much light for her to sleep with, so she sleeps with a sleep mask. So I wake up and I'm looking around the room, and I see a pair of legs. It's odd. I didn't really think that much of it because I was still kind of in that sleepy state, and I'm in that transition of consciousness that you go through when you wake up. Weird things can happen. I never saw anything before, but I've heard my name called, things like that, and sort of snapped out of sleep. So I just figured it was something like that, and I'm rubbing my eyes a little bit, and I didn't really think that much of it. And I open my eyes and I look again, and still a pair of legs there. And then it got exciting. The adrenal glands start pumping. So I start rubbing my eyes again, and I'm thinking, there's just no way. And I'm rubbing my eyes, and at this point, I'm fully awake. I'm more awake than I am right now because of the adrenaline, but I was definitely awake. I put my hands down, and those legs were still there. And my brain just sort of stopped. Like something that I thought was utterly out of the realm of possibility in the universe was occurring in front of my face. And that was really God's point, was to make me deal with this. I'm looking at them, and it's a pair of legs, and they're in these pants that just reminded me of when I was a kid growing up on a farm. All the old timers, they all had these same pants, They're all from Agway or something like that, and they're just these old work pants. Anyway, so those were the legs. I could see work boots at the bottom, but looking up, I could see a waist and a really dark brown belt, and then above that, it just was nothing, and I could see the room behind it. As I'm watching, it starts to fade. As it's fading, I can then see the room behind it, and it's just faded down to nothing. And that was it. And like I said, my head was just empty at that point, because I'm just God-smacked, I think is the term, literally. But I couldn't think of what this was, beyond just that I had just seen an apparition. I'd actually seen an apparition. And in your head, you kind of go through this thing like, well, people hallucinate. Yeah, people who take hallucinogenics hallucinate. I wasn't on any hallucinogenic. People in having a psychotic break may have an hallucination, but I wasn't having a psychotic break. So, those possibilities are out the window. What else could it be? I had an effect and I'm trying to find a cause and, trying to do it in a non-fallacious kind of way. And in my materialistic world, it just didn't fit. And again, that was the point that God was making. He's like, well, you don't think this exists? Here you go. Deal with this. Have fun. It reminded me of raising kids. You see your kid doing something they shouldn't be doing, and you tell them, and they're like, oh, yeah. It's like, okay, well, you do what you think is best. And then, what is going to happen happens, and then you tell them. There's 2 lessons here. Lesson number 1 is not to do that again, but the bigger lesson number 2 is to listen to your father. So this ghost story, for me, coming out of it was a 2-part lesson. Lesson 1 was the world behind the world exists and you got to deal with it, and you really have to live your life knowing how things work in order to avoid some mistakes that you could be making. And the second one was to listen to God and to eventually get to where I've gotten, which is to trust God fully, 100%. I don't even question things anymore. It's just, I don't need to know the reason. Just if I feel confident that what I'm being told is I understand it, then off I go. So, as an experience, that's what the experience meant to me. There's a Bible verse that relates to this experience that I wanted to share, and this comes from Proverbs 3:4. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. That's sort of the definition of atheism right there, along with self-worship. But trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. So the 2 lessons I said that I took out of this experience, I think that talks to those. But, we have to learn to trust in God and to not rely on our own understanding. That's how God revealed the truth to me, was He destroyed my own understanding. He made me face things that I couldn't understand. So that's my ghost story. Hope you liked it.